Okay, we're good to go.
Dr. Mary Frances Berry has been a Geraldine R. Siegel Professor of American Social Thought and a Professor of History at the University of Pennsylvania since 1987. She received her PhD in history from the University of Michigan and law degree from the University of Michigan Law School, and a Bachelor of Arts degree from Howard University. She's the author of 12 books. Professor Berry has had a distinguished career in public service. From 1980 to 2004, she was a member of the United States Commission on Civil Rights. And from 1993 to 2004, served as the chair. Between 1977 and 1980, Dr. Berry served as the Assistant Secretary of Education in the United States Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, as it was called then. She has also served as Provost of the University of Maryland and Chancellor of the University of Colorado at Boulder, the first African-American woman to head a major research university. In recognition of her scholarship and public service, Professor Berry has received 35 honorary doctoral degrees and many awards, including the NAACP's Roy Wilkins Award, the Rosa Parks Award of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and the Ebony Magazine Black Achievement Award. So we warmly welcome you today, Dr. Berry, as well as our other special guest, Connor Donnan, who I'm not supposed to read that, that part since he's not going to be on there. I'm sorry.
Why don't you back up and start over?
Okay. I'll start with this part. We warmly welcome you today, Dr. Berry, and thank you for being with us. We are so pleased to have you here.
Well, thank you very much. And now I have 13 books because history teaches us to resist. History teaches us to resist is the latest one, and I think is apt for the times in which we live.
Thank you for sharing that. It's always good to know there are more, and we appreciate that. I want to start with a question that we'll be really honest. We were thrilled to see you back in January as a guest on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. That was on Martin Luther King's birthday.
Right.
And Connor is the one who told us that you were going to be on, our board member who is a student of yours. And we so gladly tuned in. And I'll tell you, we just thought you were the coolest person for doing that show.
Oh,
and for
thank
your
you.
sense of humor and for being on that with him. And so what was that like? And being on that show and talking with a young man who is from South Africa after you had also worked so hard in the anti-apartheid movement there.
Well, I had fun with Trevor Noah. We became sort of like soulmates. It's funny, when he first came in and we started talking before we went on the show, I said, "Hello, colored boy," because at the time that he grew up in South Africa, people of mixed race like him were called colored boy. He knew what I was talking about. He laughed. And it turned out that all the places that he had either lived or he had relatives like his grandmother and so on, I had actually been there in the places. I could envision myself in those places. So we could talk about it, although since he's so much younger than me, he comes along later. Whereas my first time being in South Africa was in the 70s when I was in the Carter administration, and then over and over and over again. And then he kept telling me that I look like Mandela's sister, which many South Africans tell me that anyway. Although when I was with Nelson, he never thought that, but that's what they think. So it was fun. It was stress-free, and I thought funny and interesting at the same time.
Well, we're both huge fans of the show, and we both have read his biography, Born a Crime, and we just absolutely loved it and resonated with so many of the messages. And we felt like his message is very timely for the times that we're in as well.
And in fact, last summer, just about a year ago, he appeared here in Hershey, and to an audience of a couple thousand people. And we and our wives we all went together and we just laughed and laughed.
Oh, okay.
And his observations and his humor, both political and just observational, about life in general, and also his growing up in South Africa. It was funny and poignant, and we enjoyed it so much.
Well, great.
Well, one of the things that our mission here at Someone to Tell It To is all about listening to one another. And we want to start with this question about listening for you. Whose voices have you listened to throughout your life that have influenced you to be a teacher, an advocate, and a leader in the hard times and intense work of changing our world for the better?
Well, most of the people that I've listened to, aside from the elders in my own family, when I was a child, I remember sitting around at night with the other children as they told stories to each other about what you had to do to get ahead and what they had been through and this and that. Those were, I was very impressed by all of that. But the other part is teachers. Teachers were very important. And in particular, every time I went from grade to grade, there would be some teacher who was really important until the time when I got to what they call now middle school. There was one teacher, and we sort of had an affinity. She was an English teacher because her name was Mary Frances too.
Mhm.
It was Mary Frances Robinson. And we got along really well. And then when I was in high school, my favorite teacher was a woman named Minerva Hawkins, who was a history teacher. And one of the things she told me was that you should not be a historian because historians don't make any money. And what you should do is major in science. That's what she told me. So what I did is I didn't want to major in science, but she told me, when you go to college, you major in science. I said, but I like history. She said, you can read history. Go major in science. Maybe you'll get a job. So I majored in chemistry. But then after I had done chemistry, and she and I stayed in touch over the years, and she always gave me advice and counsel. And until her death, years later, she was, I would say, my best friend. And I majored in chemistry. She liked that, but then I never told her. But after I finished organic chemistry, going through all the chemistries, and after I finished the math and all that stuff and the biology, I changed my major. And I changed it because I was sick of it. And I wanted to do something else. And I had a philosophy course. And by the way, I was in philosophy courses at Howard with Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, other people who were, Cortland Cox, who were in SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee during the Civil Rights Movement. We were all philosophy majors. I figured I could major in philosophy. It wasn't history, so I wasn't really lying to her. But then I loved philosophy, especially logic. And after I finished and decided to go to graduate school in history, I finally told her that I thought I would be able to make a living somehow being a historian because that's what I loved. And for the rest of my life, she remained a voice I listened to. When I was in the government and had big fights with President Reagan, Ronald Reagan, over civil rights, and he ended up, firing me for opposing him. She said, she sent me a note, I remember, she said, remember, Mary Frances, when you're in the limelight, you make a good target. And that's all she said. But anyway, there were people, many people who were influential and important, but those are among the ones that were.
Well, you just have lived such a storied life. And the more we spent time researching and just learning more about your life, I mean, one of our favorite things to do is literally just to listen to people's stories. And that's why we founded Someone to Tell It To, because we realized there's a whole world of people starving to be heard. And especially those who are of color, who have not been heard. And so I maybe wanted to ask just a follow-up question to that is, do you feel as if your voice has been heard throughout your life?
Well, I don't think my voice has been heard throughout my life, or if it has been heard, it hasn't always been to my advantage. For example, when I was in high school, we were reading something I've forgotten, And in the book, it was a French writer, and it was in English though. But the kids kept calling themselves comrade, which of course in French just means your friend and comrade. And it was during the McCarthy era in this country. And one of the teachers heard us calling each other comrade, and she thought somehow we had been influenced by communists. So she heard us, but she didn't really hear us. And the next thing I knew, some guy came to talk to me and said, I'm from the government. What do you mean by calling people comrade? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And I told him that we were reading this book and it was great, you know, and these people were calling each other comrade. And he just laughed and then he left. But as I said, voice was heard. Later on, when I was involved in political work, I have found myself mostly in opposition to whatever is the prevailing narrative that is going on in the country. So I have had to find ways to sort of influence decisions by making my voice heard by networks of people, whether they're reporters or whether they're friends or whether they're people who can get the word out, and being aggressive about making it known myself, but not being concerned about retribution, because retribution will fall upon you.
Right now, to no one's surprise, we are in a very turbulent time, both with the COVID pandemic, economic downturn, and now the racial issues that are just throughout our country, and the protests and the demonstrations. Yesterday in the New York Times, there was an article that was entitled something about the fact that this time, in essence, this time it's different. The feeling that the demonstrations and the protests are so widespread, and that there were between 17 and 26 million people who they have estimated have participated in demonstrations since this all began. Do you think this time is different? I mean, all the protests that have gone on over the last 50, 60 more years, change has happened, but there's still so much to be done. Do you see a difference with what's happening today?
Well, on the race issue, there is still in our country and in the world the prevalence of white supremacy as a given, which has not been eroded by the various civil rights laws and all the changes we've made in a positive direction. There have been changes in a negative direction, so that we end up with white supremacy, which was ingrained in law and culture in the earliest history of the country, still being having an oppressive effect in the society, no matter what happens. Martin Luther King thought that, he didn't really think it, but he said it because Coretta, his wife, told me that, of course, Martin knew better, but he was trying to argue for the vote. And in a speech he gave in 1957, in his first coming out as a public figure in Washington at an event, he said that if we ever get the ballot, if we ever get the vote, all of our problems will be solved. If we get the vote, we'll have great judges and we'll have the rule of law. And he talked about all these great things that were going to happen when we get the ballot. And I said to Coretta, I said, now, of course, we didn't get them. She said, he knew too that we wouldn't get them, but we needed the ballot. We did need the ballot, and he was trying to make sure we got voting rights. Well, we got the ballot. We had civil rights movement. Every time there's a movement of some kind, there's a response, but the response never gets at the heart of the problem. Maybe it's not possible to get, I don't know, but it never gets at the heart of the problem. Usually what happens, because we have a democracy, a Republican form of government and with democratic principles, is that we get some kind of compromise or something And then people run out of energy and then they go on to something else and there's a diversion. My book, History Teaches Us to Resist, is about that, about the various movements and how some of them succeeded in what they were doing, but they didn't really change the overrating rating narrative, and how some failed. Okay? Now, so in this country, what you have is laws on the books that very often aren't enforced. And the history from all the reports I did at the Civil Rights Commission and all the studies and everything, Coroner report, report after report after report, is that they mostly are not enforced in the way that the people recommended that they should be enforced. So we have this persistent problem. Now we have the issue of the police as a catalyst, and we have responses. But if you look at the responses, anyone who has studied this can tell you that they won't solve the problem. The problem of police abuse of unarmed blacks will not be solved by having video cameras. How do we know this? We should have video cameras to be sure, but it's not going to solve the problem because there were video cameras in some of the incidents that occurred where people were killed, and they got killed anyway. And in some cases, like in the Floyd case and in Eric Garner, the police officer who abused the person saw the cameras on them while they were abusing the person. It's okay to have cameras, but what happens is that politicians want to appear to solve the problem, and they then pass legislation, which is nice, but they know it's not really going to solve the problem until you get the heart of it, is that how are Black people seen? How are they to be treated? What do we think about inequality in our society, whether it's class or race or whatever? So is this time different? What's different about this time is that we have social media. And social media, compared to the 1960s and some of the earlier episodes, permits you to get in touch with a whole bunch of people all at once and to stay in touch and to express yourself. It also makes it possible for you to be kept under surveillance. See, we have to keep that in mind as you go about all these different things that you're doing. But the world, the internet, makes it possible to connect all over the world. So everybody all over the world sees at the same time that all these things are happening over and over and over and over and over and over again. And young people watch mainly video of that type. Young people don't watch the evening news every night at the same time and have dinner. They don't do any of that. There's a whole different way of doing this. So the connections are there. So now we have COVID. Now we have economic crisis, an economic crisis in our country and the world. People are not in school. They haven't been in school. Even when they were supposed to be in school, they weren't in school because it was online, and so who knew? They were supposed to listen to recordings or something, which nobody wanted to do unless they were forced to, and you couldn't force them. So now what we have is anybody who has a household who has young people in it who tries to force them to go do something knows what I mean.
I'm raising my hand on that one. We have four small kids at home.
Right, you're going to make the kids sit down and you're going to be there for an hour, whatever. Good luck with that. Okay, now, after a while. In any case, and even adults get bored after a while and want to go for a drive or go for a drink or something, or stand out in the street. So in fact, we have a lot of time for people to protest, a lot of time for people to analyze and to show their experience and to gather together to do all these things. And that is why the protest, in my view, is going on longer. And politicians are mistaken if they think that by passing some specific piece of legislation or something, they're going to make it all stop and go away. And as one of them told me, what we want to do is move on. We want to move on now. And I've had reporters calling me the last few days saying, am I ready to call for reconciliation? Like in South Africa, we could have a commission. And the commission could say, let's let us reconcile and let us go on our way. And I say, well, good luck with that. And in South Africa, the problems were not solved either. We've got to continue working at them. We will. I don't even think the election, if we get that far, will do anything to solve it, because so many people are distrustful of the political system. And I don't know anyone who's really eager about, what the outcome might be. There's no love lost. Nobody's ranting and raving and saying, I gotta go out and get, whoever it is that's running. So we'll see.
Yeah. One of the leadership characteristics that we see as being invaluable just in general is empathy. We sometimes feel as if there's just not enough empathy in the world. And an author and a researcher like yourself that we quote often, her name is Dr. Brene Brown, if you've ever heard of her. And she's recently talked about empathy, and she said, in order to empathize with someone's experience, you must be willing to believe them as they see it and not how you imagine their experience to be. And you had referenced social media, and based on our, just scrolling the walls of social media, we think that we have a lot of work to do in our country and our world when it comes to empathy, especially with racial injustice. And what insights have you gained, particularly when speaking to white audiences, about empathy?
I think that what people express in an audience setting, and when they ask questions, and when we have discussion, when I go out to speak places, sometimes they don't really express what they really think. It's just like when people answer polls, which I never answer, but some people do, I guess. They never ask me, so I don't know. That's why I never answer. But anyway, they say, well, I'm not telling that pollster what I think, because why do I tell them what I really think? So that means you can't figure out what they think, which is not a good, but you can't keep them from doing it. It's a distortion. Some people can put themselves in the other person's shoes, which is what empathy is, seeing it from that person's perspective. And other people cannot. As I had a young protege of mine tell me a few days ago, a white woman who I've known since she was an undergraduate, and she's now a lawyer, that she was out discussing with friends about what happened with George Floyd and all the different things that have happened. And these are people who consider themselves white liberals or progressives. And once she finished, they said, well, yes, but he was doing something illegal. He had a counterfeit bill. If he hadn't been doing anything illegal, then he wouldn't have been in a problem. So he was committing a crime. And so the answer is that people have to stop. Eric Garner was selling loose cigarettes, which was a crime. If these people were not vulnerable by committing crimes, then, the outcome, I could feel better about them, they said. And I don't feel great about them dying, but I can see where they could have avoided the encounter with the police altogether if they had not. And then when she tried to explain the situation these people live in, what options do they have and what has happened to them, they couldn't empathize with that so much. It was, well, we see signs on the McDonald's that they're hiring, so why don't they go work there or whatever. But they considered themselves liberals and progressives, but they could not put themselves in the other person's shoes. A friend of mine has a sign in her window that says, do you care more about your property than you do about doing something that might cause a Black person to lose their life? And she's talking about people who call for little property. They saw some stranger walking up the street and they call the police, and then it ends up in an altercation. And some people have taken umbrage at that as a distorted kind of question, false dichotomy, because people should not walk up to your door And they should call the police if they walk up to your door, even though they don't know why you're walking up to their door. You just are somebody they're not accustomed to seeing in the neighborhood. So if we had empathy, I think if we had two things, if we had more empathy, more willingness to listen and to see and to put yourself in other people's shoes, that might help us. The other thing is that if we had more people willing to explore and investigate and to remember how things are supposed to work, we wouldn't be caught up in whatever the media tells us, whether it's true or false. The headline, I mean, whatever it says, we all go running off because it said this or said that or the other. I just read this morning a public health official who was saying that she didn't know why the national government didn't just announce that we must all do all these different things immediately in every state in the United States. And we should open all the schools or close all the schools until the virus is over. And that, why didn't somebody in the national government, the president or a general from the Pentagon or somebody announce that that's what everybody in the United States is supposed to do? And I thought to myself, here's an example of a person who is very well educated, who never read the Constitution. Doesn't know that the national government can't go around ordering everybody in every state to do X, Y, Z. And it would be a simple matter of just picking up the Constitution and looking at it, or when you read something. And then I remembered how many times I've heard that same formulation over and over again in the media. And it frustrates people when I talk with them because they don't know this. They say, well, we're frustrated because we don't know why the national government doesn't do that. If you explored and if you knew something, and if we taught civics maybe, and if you had some empathy too, and you added those two together, we might get somewhere.
We agree. That we absolutely agree to that. And empathy is one of the concepts that we talk about all the time. We write about it, we talk about it, we hope we're living it imperfectly, certainly, but we are certainly trying to model it for people, and how important empathy, how important it is, putting ourselves in other person's shoes, in their place, seeing it from their perspective. It's not easy, there's no doubt, but we do believe that is an answer. That is a huge part of the answer here, as well as the education that you're talking about too, with the Constitution, and especially in matters that are going on today. You have also said, written that when people have a moral authority, they need to use it. Would you describe to us what you believe moral authority is and how you believe it can best be used?
If you model taking a position that promotes empathy, that promotes analysis, and that promotes courage in confronting attacks on other people or things that harm other people, and if you're courageous about it, okay, no matter what the cost is to you personally, then from that evolves moral authority. You have the moral authority to speak to others about whatever it is because you're modeling it, okay? If you're not modeling it and all you're doing is just mouthing a bunch of stuff, I mean, as an exemplar of all of that, Martin Luther King modeled what he was up to. Not just him, Rosa Parks for years modeled what she was up to, not just sitting down on the bus, but for years after that when I saw her in various causes. I first met her at a conference in Detroit after the 1967 Detroit riots, when she was in there taking notes and talking to people and trying to figure out whether there was something she could help with doing. And then later she came to the Free South Africa movement and got up and made a public speech. The first time I ever heard her make a public speech. She came and thought she was just there to be a symbol. And we said, no, make a speech. She said, make a speech? I said, yeah. She did. But these people are symbolic of that. All those years at Coretta after Martin was assassinated, went around promoting the principle of nonviolence and the principles for what he stood. People don't understand the role that she played and how important it was, both in public and behind the scenes. So it doesn't mean that you're always right. Just because you are committed and you're courageous, you may be wrong about something sometimes, but you should do the best you can do according to your own analysis and view of things. And I'll give you another example. Recently, there was, day before yesterday or sometime, a story in the press about people signing a statement attacking cancel culture, or that they call it. And there were people attacking the people who were attacking cancel culture. And there were a group of scholars and luminaries and public figures and celebrities who were all saying, you know, we have to get beyond this business of suppressing expression and all the rest of it. And they were attacked. Well, I think that being willing to say courageously that there ought to be freedom of expression is important, and you should expect to get attacked when you say it. It's like the guy that runs Facebook, whose name I forget. Who's the guy who owns
Zuckerberg. Mark
Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg, who I've never been able to figure out, he values, according to the people who work for him, freedom of expression above other values. Now, you can argue with that and say, I believe that the value of something else, religion or whatever it is you believe, patriotism or whatever. But that is having, even though he's a billionaire with a certain amount of moral authority. And I guess a billionaire can have moral authority because he seems to stand.
We'll never know in this lifetime.
What did you say? You never know in this lifetime?
We'll never know in this lifetime.
No, we'll never know. But even though he's got all that money, when he says, well, you know, I just can't figure out anything to be for except freedom of expression. Now, I would be disappointed, even though part of me would like him to do it for the people who are concerned about the issues. If he tomorrow said, well, because all these people are boycotting my company, I've now decided, hey, freedom of expression is not all that great. And we're going to move on. I don't think I would like that. Moral authority doesn't always mean that you have to be for what I'm for.
You had mentioned just a moment ago about Martin Luther King, and I know there's always quotes that are floating around social media that we all can connect with. And one that we've read recently as a statement that he said, where our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about this tension that we sometimes feel in our listening work, about listening and truly trying to hear both sides, but then also about not being silent about the things that matter.
Well, as I understand what Martin Luther King believed, is that, and I get this all from many years of conversations with Coretta. And sometimes I call him Martin just because I'm used to talking with her, saying Martin and Martin. I don't mean I can say Dr. Martin Luther King, but it's not meant disrespectfully. It's just something I do because of that. But what he meant by that is that you should listen, be willing to hear, and try putting yourself in the other person's shoes to listen to them and see where they're coming from. But if you believe principally that something is the value that we ought to adhere to, you should explain it and continue to support it and continue to promote it, no matter what. So you're listening and you're taking into account what others have to say, doesn't mean you abandon your beliefs. Now, I have always found something interesting and new when I listen to people, either in the way they present it, or they say something I hadn't thought of, or whatever. It gives me pause so I can think it through and try to figure it all out. And I like that because I like testing what I think. I like challenging the challenge to what I think over and over again, because firmly held values are too important not to have that testing and not to have that challenging over and over again.
Michael, I'm thinking of one of our team members who just is publishing our blog that's going to go up on our site, and I wondered if you could tell that.
I was thinking the same thing. Go ahead with that.
Well, you'll tell it better than I will probably, but anyways, long story short is one of our team members has had a history of going to Gettysburg year in and year out around July 4th with some close friends of hers, and they camp, and they've done this for like 15 years or more. And it just so happens, I don't know if you had seen this in the news, but there was a lot of protesting happening in Gettysburg over the holiday weekend. And it just so happens that she probably sees certain issues differently than most of the protesters there. And she initially wanted to just kind of remove herself from it and not wanting to be a part of it at all because she was so frustrated by it all. But then she actually went out of her way to engage somebody in conversation who happens to be on this other side politically. And she was able to hear this, it happened to be his perspective and the life that he's been living. And she heard about all of this brokenness and pain that this man has gone through in his life. And so he's got a very jaded look at the world. But when you're able to really take the time to get to know him better, there was at least a little bit more of an understanding of why he was responding the way that he was. And that doesn't make his actions or anyone's actions right if they're causing harm to somebody else. But it was at least, it gave her, a very different perspective change, I think. And she was able to respond with some sense of compassion and empathy.
Even though it didn't change her mind and she didn't agree with the stances he was taking politically, socially, but it gave her an insight by her listening. And she said it was hard. It was hard sometimes not to speak out, not to speak up, not to challenge him, very negatively. But she felt good about the fact that she was able to take the time and hear him, and that she believed that he felt good, that he was heard, that somebody listened to his struggles and his pain, and at least tried to see some things from his perspective.
Well, I think that's great.
So do we. We believe, one of our values here with Someone to Tell It To is that we believe that we have something to learn from every single person we encounter, that everyone we listen to can have something to teach us and to show us. It doesn't mean we have to agree with their decisions or their perspectives, but we can learn, and it helps us to understand just a little bit better.
Well, if there's anything, I hope this does help in that experience you just described. But among the things that bother me so much in the last few years is the great polarization in our society. And everyone talks about how polarized we are. And most of the people who have the position to voice something that might help it add to the polarization rather than diminishing it, right, by criticizing people without hearing them, without being unwilling to argue with them, and just dismissing them, as, well, this is unacceptable. I don't want to hear what you have to say. And then they turn around and say, well, we don't know why there's such polarization. Well, obviously, and they do not, the people I'm talking about who do this, don't want their own views tested. They don't want to put their views up for grabs for the people who are on the other side to challenge them and then explain why they want to do it. Take the thing about the monuments and the statues and taking them down.
Mm-hmm.
and debating that. I first had the view some years ago and wrote a piece in the New York Times about it, that we should not take George Washington's name off a school down in New Orleans, which was being protested, because he was the father of the country, and even though he owned slaves, he freed them when he, before he died, but anyway, he was the father of the country. So he did some good things and some bad things, and he was a man of his times. And so why not just explain what he did? I was in the explain what people did school at that time. Put a little plaque there, explain the whole thing. And I was attacked by some people at the school who were involved and said, "You don't live here, don't tell us what to do," which was fine. I accept that. But now I'm beginning to wonder if that's enough, and if what you ought to do is take things down and put something else up and then put a plaque too.
Mm.
Well, they've done that in some places in New Orleans, where they used to sell slaves at the market in certain places. They put up something else and then they explain all the things that happened. So if you stand there, you can read it and you can see, well, this used to be where X was. And maybe that's it. But people can have a reasonable debate on all sides of that argument about what do you do about Thomas Jefferson, and what do you do about Benjamin Franklin, what do you do about Alexander Hamilton. But to just dismiss whatever side you're on, the other person's point of view, without even listening. And then you say, well, I don't know why we're so polarized around this issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's in part because you refuse to listen to the other person's point of view.
We have a donor and a supporter of Someone to Tell To, and it so happens that she's white and she has some kids that are of color. And I'm assuming they were adopted. But she has recently posted a statement on social media that we really appreciated. And it was a statement that said, if a Black person tells you that a phrase is offensive to them, then it is. End of story. It is not up to you as a white person to tell them that it's not. Instead, educate yourself as to why the phrase is offensive and stop using it. We so often talk about our friendship, Michael and I, and our relationship together as being a catalyst for this compassionate listening movement of which we are fostering here at Someone to Tell To. And in our relationship with each other and with our spouses and with other close friends, we've learned that if there's something that is harmful to your friend, then it is our job and our responsibility to stop it, to work towards unity, which means considering others' needs ahead of your own, which we talked about empathy. So the question for you is, why do you think people, first off, have such a difficult time understanding this concept, and then second, actually implementing it in their relationship with others?
Well, it's hard to do it on any question, but on the race question, it's hard because people are so accustomed to, look, most white people are accustomed to being in positions in the status hierarchy above most Black people. I mean, it's just true. Mm-hmm. When you were saying that, I recall that a faculty member said something to me, and I said, I think a white faculty member, I said, I find that comment racist and offensive. Mm. And instead of saying something else or modifying the comment, the person just repeated the same statement again. And I said, what is it about my not speaking English? You said something. I said, I found that statement racist and offensive. And rather than you modifying the statement some way or standing there for a minute and figuring out what was it I said, you just repeat the same statement to me. I don't know what I'm supposed to take away from your doing that, except that you don't see me as a person who you should attend to when I say something, like listen to me or hear that I said something, because I know I spoke English. I'm sure of it. And the person was quite taken aback and said, well, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not, well, I don't know what racism is then, if that's racist for me just to repeat. I said, you didn't even listen or analyze for a minute what I said. You just repeated it all over again as if I were to take it. That's a power relationship, psychologically power relationship that is being expressed. And is a manifestation of a long endured notion without the person being maybe conscious of it, of white supremacy in encountering people like that. I have observed the person in other settings, and I have observed other people saying things in a meeting or something, which the person didn't agree with, but they never just repeated back to them exactly what they said, as if I said that and now I'll just say it again. And that's no way to do anything. If the person finds it offensive, then find some other way to say it, or just say, well, I'm sorry, and then, move on.
And we realize that we're never going to please everybody, but nevertheless, that doesn't mean we shouldn't stop trying.
Absolutely.
Our job is to always, as much as humanly possible, to consider other people's needs ahead of our own needs, to put other people's, that's the golden rule. So.
Yeah. I know that we know that our time is running short, and you have other commitments soon. And there's one thing I want to share. Tom knows about this. I had been given for Christmas a book, a biography of the life of the tennis player Arthur Ashe.
Oh, yes.
And
by the way.
we know. That's what I'm getting at. One night, I often would read before I would fall asleep each night, and one night I was reading, and then I came across a section in the book with pictures in it, and there was a picture of you.
Really?
With Arthur Ashe.
Huh.
In front of the White House.
Mm-hmm. We were protesting about the Haitians.
That's exactly it.
The last protest that Arthur was involved in.
Yes.
We loved seeing him so much that time before he passed. So that was the last one.
Yeah. So we also thought that was pretty cool of you because we admire him. We like tennis.
Oh,
We've been in the Arthur Ashe Stadium in New York City together. And we were just his story is also so impressive, how he became an activist and spoke out for people who were marginalized and hurting, and appreciated that so much. And to see you there with him was pretty neat. I remember I took a picture of it and texted it to Tom and to our friend and board member Connor, your student, as well, and say, look who I just saw, who I'm reading about, and
she's going to be on our podcast.
That's right.
I don't know if I've seen that picture.
Well, we will make sure you get that.
Yeah, because I loved Arthur. He was one of the sweetest, most gentle, talk about somebody having moral authority.
Yes.
Arthur was quintessentially a person with Martha, and I loved him. And so, and it was so sad what happened with him, but I never saw the picture.
We will make sure you get it. And there's also, he wrote about it then too, a little bit later in the book. There was a story about that where he mentioned you. So.
I don't know anything about it.
We'll make sure you see it.
Yeah.
All right. I appreciate that.
Could you do us a favor before we close out our time together? We needed to have you share this story because Connor, our board member and your student, had told us this story that you had told him and their class at Penn about the Smithsonian Museum of African American History, and they were preparing to open in 2016, and you had been asked to donate your dining room table to the museum. Could you just tell us why you received that invitation and what was your response?
Well, I had been working on trying to get a museum on the mall for years with another group of people who were employees, Black employees at the Smithsonian. And Lonnie Bunch, who ended up being the director of that museum and who's now head of the whole Smithsonian, the first Black guy, was part of our early group that we worked on that issue. So that's one aspect of it. And I was on the Smithsonian board of advisors for years. And I kept trying to get them to agree to put a museum on the mall. And they refused. The arguments they kept telling me was that there was no space on the mall.
Oh,
And so
wow.
we went out and walked up and down the mall to find space,
There's a lot of room there.
And they got really angry at me because I kept raising the issue during my terms, 2 terms on the board. That's part of the story. The other part of it is that the Free South Africa movement to end apartheid in South Africa and free Nelson and all the prisoners and get sanctions from this country was organized by a group of us. Randall Robinson, Sylvia Hill, Bill Lucy, and Roger Wilkins. And we met every day during the week at my house here in Washington for a year and a half in the morning to plan the day's activities. And the dining room table that you're referring to was in my dining room all that time. And part of the time we sat there, other times we sat in the living room. They wandered all over my house all the time. And that's what we did. And that was the table. And Lonnie Bunch knew that. And so he was talking about me giving the table to the Smithsonian. They were going to set up some kind of exhibit on the Free South Africa movement, which was one of the successful movements that I write about in History Teaches Us to Resist. And the story is, I told them no. I said, I'm still eating on the table. I'm not, when I'm no longer eating on it, you can have the table. And that was the story.
Well, we like that story. I mean, you have some moral authority too, because you can just say no. And
I learned how to say no. Yes. Well, I enjoyed being with you, but I'm afraid we're coming to the end of our time.
Yeah, we just like to do one last thing, and this will take maybe 30 seconds that we do with all of our guests. We call it rapid fire questions, and we're just going to throw a couple questions your way, and the first thing that pops into your head, just respond. So the first question is, what's giving you hope right now?
That I am able to connect with former students, friends, family over the internet, even though I can't see them in person.
Great. And this may be just a follow-up to that, but what brings you joy right now?
What brings me joy is being able to talk and encounter with people and realize that no one in my particular circle yet has gotten the COVID. So I'm very pleased about that. What's
something that you hope to see happen before your life comes to an end here on Earth?
School's open again.
Yes, we all hope that too. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Berry, we're so grateful. So grateful for your time, your wisdom, your history, your stories, and the moral authority that you have, and that has helped to move this world, this country, and this world forward. We appreciate you and your time so much.
All right, thank you very much for having me.
Blessings to you.
Very welcome. Okay, bye.